I'm Heidi Hutner, and today on Coffee with Hx2, I'll be talking with Jon Bowermaster, one of the founders of green chemistry. And we'll be finding out what is green chemistry and who Jon Bowermaster is. He's a preeminent scientist and chemist, and he has a great story to tell about really what is the precautionary principle and how do we use science and chemistry with the thought of prevention in mind. So welcome, Jon. So glad to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me here.
So could we start with what is green chemistry?
Well, a bunch of different ways of answering that question. I think the way I'll answer it is we have many disciplines in science. We have so many sub-disciplines in science. You know, you can think of there is somewhere in the world today a group of people talking about diseases of the left foot or the potential of life of belly button lint or something like that. We love in our sciences to have these special disciplines. What I realized with my friends is back in 1990-ish, there was no science of how to make something not hurt the environment, not to be toxic. There were no journals, there were no textbooks, there were no conferences. And we felt that for society to become sustainable, it must be not just a policy, not just a government program, not something else, but it had to be embedded in the sciences like any other discipline. There needed to be all the infrastructure, the conferences and the workshops and the textbooks and the journals and all of that. And so that's the beginning of green chemistry, is to create that science so that people can learn how to invent materials that don't cause pollution in the first place.
So it's fascinating to me as an educator also that Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in 1963. Mm-hmm. So that there was nothing in place in terms of education that was about that prevention and about toxics is sort of astounding to me.
Well, what there was is there's been the fields of environmental sciences for a very long time where people would go out into nature and measure toxics and measure pollution, come up with ways of monitoring toxics, monitoring pollution, coming up with ways of coming up with laws to regulate toxics, to regulate pollution. So that had evolved, you know, as a natural evolution of Rachel Carson's work. But for some strange reason, no one said, well, gee whiz, how do we just invent materials that don't cause pollution in the first place? Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things that once stated, it's so obvious, but you scratch your head and say, well, what took so long? Why was it that it needed this catalytic event? And so when, you know, Paul Anastas and I, we wrote this book, Green Chemistry, Theory and Practice, it's not that astounding of a book. Any chemist that opens it up just nods their head and goes, yep. It's just a very simple, basically it just happens to be we put the book together at the right time at the right place.
It certainly was the right time.
Yeah.
So you have a very interesting personal story. Yeah. What brought you to this?
Oh, well, so the history of this is a little bit crazy. So I'm not someone who grew up with test tubes and beakers and wanted to be a scientist. I come from a very blue-collar family of carpenters, plumbers, electricians, first-generation college student, and I actually, went to college as a music major. I got a D in high school. Chemistry, had no interest whatsoever in the sciences. And I had a group of friends, and we had a somewhat successful band, ironically, called The Elements. Okay, and so it had nothing to do with chemistry, I promise you. And we were pretty good. We were playing at the worst, best dives in Boston. We were, we had a recording contract. We're recording, and things were looking pretty promising. And the drummer of the band ended up getting leukemia. And over the course of a very short time passed away. And all of a sudden my whole life revolved around music. And what was I going to do? And at University of Massachusetts, even a music major has to take a math class and a science class and a different class. And so I was taking chemistry just to fulfill my requirement to take a science class. And while I was there, the professor asked the kid next to me if he'd be interested in doing research in his lab. I had time on my hands and said, can I come? And I wandered into the chemistry lab, and I found out I loved chemistry. And from that perspective, moving on, I just really got into chemistry, crazily into chemistry. All the time I was spent being a musician, now I'm in the lab pouring beakers and flasks, and next thing you know, I found myself at Princeton doing anti-cancer chemotherapy. We worked, a lot of us together, it wasn't just me, a lot of people came up with this drug called Olympta. It's one of the most potent, successful anti-cancer drugs sold by the Eli Lilly company. And I thought I was going to go into cancer research. I figured I'd go into academia, but out of the blue, a corporate officer from Polaroid, the photography company, hires me to work in exploratory research at Polaroid. What is a medicinal chemist going to do at a place like Polaroid? I said, no, I'm going into academia, I'm going to do this. He told me how much he's going to pay me. I said, when do I start? And all of a sudden, this kid who didn't even know what chemistry was is an industrial chemist working for a big corporation doing chemistry. Well, I invented some strange things that got into products, and while we were going through the process of getting the EPA to approve it, they didn't understand my science. It was too different, it was too strange. So I went to Washington, D.C., and I had to explain the technology. And who do I meet there but the kid that I had followed into the research lab when I was a music major, Paul Anastas. We'd known each other from the city of Quincy since the beginning of time, and we hit it off, and he was working on different policies and things like that, and here I have this technology that's environmentally benign, and that led to us writing the book Green Chemistry Theory and Practice. I, as an industrial chemist, saying, what do I wish I knew when I invented something to anticipate harm? Because here's the startling thing. Here it is, I have a PhD in chemistry. Not one university in the United States requires a chemist to learn anything about what makes molecules toxic. Not one university requires chemists to learn what makes molecules hazardous to the environment. So when you hear in the news that this red dye causes cancer or this plasticide that causes birth defects, you say, why in the world would anyone do that? Well, if the people inventing that have no training, how can they not? And so green chemistry is that body of scientific knowledge that helps teach chemists how to make things non-toxic and environmentally benign. And so that's where I started to practice, so the field kind of exploded. I kind of joke that I feel like Forrest Gump. Had I thought anyone was going to read this book, we would have written a better book. But the book that we wrote, it gets translated into a bunch of different languages. I think at last count, I've been to over 40 countries, meeting presidents and prime ministers, cutting ribbons, giving talks about green chemistry and the principles of green chemistry. And I kind of giggle because it really is a common sense book that anyone could have written. And so that's kind of the beginning of green chemistry.
Well, so much of what we think of as environmental concepts seems so basic. They're not that complicated. Prevention is not, we know we don't feed our children on purpose poison.
Yep.
So the first thing we do, put the poison away, lock the cabinet, but yet we put things in the products that we use every day that are poison.
Yeah, well, but even in the medical sciences, we want to react to disease rather than prevent it. Most doctors aren't really trained in prevention.
Exactly.
They're okay, treat the symptom. Well, how about not having it happen in the first place? We are a reactionary society for whatever reason, so it's easier to react to the landfill that is polluted, as opposed to thinking, how could we not make it happen in the first place? Yeah.
So what was the moment that made you have that? You obviously shifted from working for Polaroid, probably, I'm guessing, doing pretty traditional chemistry, which some of it is poisonous, right? Whether it was intention or not. So what was the moment that made you shift?
Well, again, the thing
or
is...
awaken up and think about it in that way?
So when I was at Polaroid, I really didn't want to do traditional chemistry, and so I kind of approached chemical manufacturing the way a medicinal chemist would look at things. And so really had there's this field called biomimicry. In a way, what I like to think is that I was doing molecular level biomimicry, and so at the molecular level, coming up with ways of manufacturing things. But I really wasn't driven to, let's make things less toxic. I was, let's make things more efficient, like make them work better, like them make cheaper. Now, interestingly enough, those are not inconsistent. If you have to dispose of waste, that costs money. If you have to pay liability lawyers because your products are toxic, that costs money. If you have to handle things special and dispose of things special, that costs money. So it's a no-brainer to want to have things less toxic, because you will always save money and have a better product because of all these things. The problem is again, if nobody has the skill set to do it, who's going to do it? But so that was moving along, and so I was intellectually approaching it as a business, but You know, we were talking earlier, and I don't often talk about this, but here I am being very, very successful at Polaroid. I've got all these patents. I've been on the cover of Celebrity magazine as an inventor. I've got this thing called green chemistry that's starting, and I'm approaching it. When life has a way of surprising you, my 2-year-old son dies of a birth defect. My son John was born with this disease called biliary atresia, where his liver was detached from his intestines. We got him surgery at his birth, and by 2 years old, we lost him. And so here I am, a very successful chemist for my age, lying in bed at night, the evening of his funeral, asking myself, what if something I touched caused his birth defect? What if something I maybe even got an award for caused his disease and ultimate death? I didn't see myself as this uber super chemist. I said there's something wrong. So I quit Polaroid and I went to UMass and started a PhD program in green chemistry, where I had everything that's in a normal chemistry program, but I added a 1-semester class in toxicology, added a 1-semester class in environmental mechanisms, added a 1-semester class in law and policy. And over the next 11 years, about 120 students passed through that program at different levels. You know what the average time it took for one of them to get a job on graduation? 2 days. Every single one of them within two weeks was the longest anyone. Industry says, wait a minute, they can solve problems and they have a clue about toxicity. Industry gobbled up green chemistry immediately because here's the thing, there are companies that have $1 billion R&D budgets. And you know what? Those companies have $1 billion environmental compliance budgets. They're spending the same amount of money making sure they're consistent with regulations as they are inventing their next generation. So the CEO says, from now on, I want all my scientists to only make non-toxic, environmentally benign materials that are non-regulated. Not one of those scientists have had a class in toxicity, not one of those. So the desire is articulated and felt and understood. The ability to meet that need still today isn't there because universities aren't training scientists to do this.
I found your talk, I found you and I pulled you in here to come talk with me. I've seen you on the web many, many times. You have two fantastic talks for Bioneers. I love Bioneers. I'll make a pitch for Bioneers. There's an amazing environmental conference and they tape. And
Yes,
so
and
they're sort of like TEDs, but they're all focused on the environment, right?
Exactly, yes, they're beautiful.
So as an educator, what really, really spoke to me, I'm not a chemist. I can't pretend to know the science that you're doing. But this idea, of prevention is key in terms of sustainability and what I do. But also this idea that we're not talking to each other.
Right.
So the chemist is in the chemistry lab, and the physicist is over here in the physics lab.
Yep.
But the people working on environmental problems aren't in the same
Right.
educational
Yep.
community.
Yep.
And so and this is your argument, right?
Yep.
So people might be creating something that's really cool and seems really helpful, but they're not thinking about environmental problems and the results or what the consequences of this thing. And it's not just chemistry, right? This applies to so many fields. It could be engineering, it could be, like I said, it could be physics, it could be climate issues, it could be any kind of energy design, right? If we don't design it in such a way with that in mind. And so that's what I love about what I do is that we learn about all the environmental problems. And so whatever my students then bring to the work they're going to do in the world, they have an awareness. They know sort of there's a consequence. And it's actually kind of indigenous thinking. It's thinking that the 7 generations ahead.
Of course.
Right.
Yes,
So what I do
Mm-hmm.
has an impact 7 generations down the line, and I have to be aware and think about that. So, again, the chemistry piece for me, I can't understand exactly what you're doing, and I greatly admire it. But I love the educational piece, and I think it should speak to every educator. And I think what you're doing is really revolutionizing our sustainability education, our environmental education. No, it's amazing, and you're very selfless in doing it. So you're sort of going around talking to universities all over the world.
Trying, and again, the idea is to just, all I'm asking is for them to look at their curriculum and add. It doesn't have to be a standalone class if they want to integrate it to other classes, but find a way that no student graduates not being exposed to some of these skills, you know, because, and you're absolutely right, it's not creating the knowledge. There is a field called toxicology. There's a field called environmental health sciences. People are generating papers and information on all these things, but interestingly enough, the people who make molecules are unaware that they exist.
Right.
And so it's how do you form that conduit? And it's, if you look at Sutan, was Da Vinci an artist or a scientist? Was Galileo an artist or a scientist? We didn't really have these definitions. And then around, if you go to a journal article in the, say, 1900, if a scientist was doing something, they made it and then they studied it. They did both, making and studying. That was what it meant to be a scientist. And then at some point, we separated. And some people became makers of stuff, and they made things, and some people became makers of knowledge. They studied things. And that became two different paths, the synthesis of materials and the synthesis of it. Then Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring. And Silent Spring talks about environmental impacts. Well, which road do you think that went on? The studiers of things and the makers of things just got further and further apart. And so now, if you go to a university, the professors and the groups that are making things, they're furiously and feverishly making plastics, making polymers, making materials, doing things, and the people studying things, they're not even going to the same seminars, they're not taking the same classes, they're two very different cultures, and all I'm saying is, hey, come back together again.
Have a conversation.
Yeah. Learn from each other, you know, and we'll all, and what's really interesting is a lot of people think that doing green chemistry inhibits creativity. They see it as a set of constraints. And I'd argue it's the exact opposite. If you apply principles of green chemistry to discovery, it actually opens up innovation and creativity. And so it actually accelerates time to market. So it's a very practical approach.
So you're working on a book right now, or you have a book that's about to come out. You're in some stages of that. It's not in print yet, but it's almost there. So tell us about your book.
So Island Press is publishing, and it's called The Missing Elements. And essentially it's
almost like your band name.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's in a way, my friend that died is the missing element, so that's actually not ironic. And my son is a missing element in my life, and so I've kind of tied up that whole concept of there are aspects of what we do in life that is missing, and until we fill those gaps, we can't be on a sustainable path. And it's not a simple sound bite, it's not a bumper sticker, it's something that takes a while. We have to think about it, we have to work together, so we have to look at how we do chemistry, how we learn chemistry, how we invent chemistry, and how we manage chemistry. There's no simple solution. Those four aspects have to come together, and there's missing elements in each component there. And so I kind of just go on and on about how to do that.
And is it for the general reader, or is it for chemists?
No, it's probably overly ambitious to say it's for the general reader and the chemist.
Okay.
You know, and because if I was talking about something deep in chemistry that chemists had been studying in the classes all the time, and I wanted it to be for the general public, that'd be a hard thing to do. But because chemists are not talking about toxicity and environmental, they are the general public when it comes to this subject, because it's absent from their curriculum.
That's very interesting. That's a really good point. So someone else on our show, Dr. Robert Bullard, Bob Bullard, the father of environmental justice, environmental racism, he actually said people are too impatient, that these changes take time. So in a way, you're saying the same thing.
Yeah. It's recognizing the way science works, and more importantly, the enemy of the excellent is the perfect. While things do take time, it's an interesting phenomenon. If I were to go to a science conference and give a traditional science talk, everyone would clap at the end and they would ask me traditional science questions. If I gave that identical talk, did everything the same, but at one moment casually mentioned, oh, I used water instead of methylene chloride because it's more benign, I promise you, every question after that talk, well, why did you do this? Isn't that toxic? Isn't that bad? Isn't that bad? So by saying I'm trying to do that, everyone finds what I'm not doing enough of. And if I don't say it, no one asks. So any company, any organization that says we're trying to do something to protect the environment, everyone attacks them for what they're not doing instead of celebrating what they're trying to do. And because this is so early in the game and we know so little, we need to celebrate whatever little victories from whatever motivation they are. Any advance in this space has to be celebrated and encouraged, but more often than not, because we're impatient, that's not good enough. So if you don't talk about it, we won't bother you. But if you actually go out on a limb and talk about it, you better do everything and be perfect, because excellence not good enough. And there are people suffering across the world. We've got cancer rates, we've got birth defects. Anything we can do to help that sub-perfect, I'm going to support.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you have some interesting products, if you could talk about. One is the hair color, which I find fascinating. I actually have a friend working on a book about letting her natural hair grow in so that she's all gray. But you have some solutions for that are not toxic.
Yeah. Well, again, it's the Institute is this wonderful place. So my business partner, a guy named Jim Babcock, understands the vision, and we've created this beautiful chemistry lab. It's 42,000 square feet with every piece of research equipment you could possibly imagine under one roof, and 30 of the most bright, beautiful chemists and scientists you can imagine. We just invent stuff. We don't publish papers in journals. We don't speak at technical conferences. We've kind of abandoned the typical academic trappings and just focus on making things and inventing things. And so we have an ALS drug in clinical trials, a cancer drug in clinical trials, a hair coloring technology, an asphalt paving technology, a formaldehyde-free wood composite technology. So we just invent stuff, and it's really fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
Well, tell us about your hair product. I mean, that's something I guess as a woman I relate to. So, and I have a lot of friends who have issues with it, with beauty products in general.
So this has been commercialized. It's been a year now that it's on the market. It's called Airprint. Just like you have a fingerprint, you have a hair print, and this technology is not a dye. It doesn't color your hair. It restores your hair to the color it would be had it not gone gray. And so what I discovered is that as we grow older, the cells at the base of our hair stop making the molecules that color our hair. But interestingly enough, we all make the same molecules. And it's the hair that templates those molecules to dictate the color. It's kind of like on a parking lot. If you have a parking lot with 20 cars, you could draw the lines a million different ways, right? They could be this way, they could be this way. You can think of infinite ways of doing that, but they're all 20 cars. Well, the proteins in our hair template the color molecules. So if you have black hair, it looks like this. If you have brown hair, it looks like this. So what I found, that if I can mimic that chemistry and have it penetrate the hair, your hair says, oh, this is my normal molecules, puts them in the parking spot and makes the color that it was before it was gray. It's completely non-toxic. It won't fade. It won't wash out. It'll grow out because it's a topical thing. But if you could invent a time machine and take a snippet of hair after someone's done that and before they went gray, it's the identical chemistry, so it's not artificial. It recreates the human pigment. It's really, really fun.
That is fun. And so what's interesting to me there, we were talking about this earlier as well, we can tell people, oh, don't dye your hair, or don't wear makeup, or only put olive oil on your skin, right? So you don't use your favorite lotion, whatever that might be with all those smells. But that's counterintuitive. People obviously like doing it. And you're asking them to stop what they do habitually and what they've done there. And you're saying, no, I'll embrace this idea that you don't want gray hair, but I'll help you do it in a way you won't harm your body.
Well, I guess my attitude is that there's a lot of things we need to do as a society to become more sustainable. One is to teach people that there are things that hurt the environment and try to somehow control human behavior. But that gets into a scary place with me. I don't really want to engineer human behavior. I want people to be people and to be doing what they want to do. My job as a chemist is to invent products that allow people to do what they do and not cause rather than be judgmental and decide what they should or shouldn't be doing, anticipate what's gonna happen and come up with ways of mitigating those problems, so that people can do what it is they want to do.
So here's another problem that I'm concerned about, which is we have over 80,000 unregulated, mostly carcinogenic chemicals in the world today, swirling in and around us. And what you're talking about is stopping future products from contributing to that. Are there ways in which you're working on getting rid of, cleaning up what's out there now?
So that's an important point, and there's a couple different ways of looking at this. All these hazardous waste sites and stuff like that. I would argue that the field of environmental sciences has been doing that for a while, and so we got to do more of it. We got to improve that. So from a green chemistry perspective, cleaning up waste is not green chemistry. However, there are remediation technologies that generate toxicity. Ironically, we clean up one mess and we make another. So there is a role for green chemistry to improve those technologies, but the whole tenet of green chemistry is not to create the waste in the first place.
Excellent. Yeah. That's an excellent explanation. And what about things like solar panels? So people talk about, okay, solar panels, that's great, but they're also polluting, right? There's also mining involved. And so what about that?
So an interesting way of looking at it is that people, erroneously, in my opinion, equate sustainable chemistry and green chemistry. They're very different subjects. In my opinion, sustainable chemistry is tied to the application. Solar energy is a sustainable technology for alternative energy. Water purification is a sustainable technology to purify water. Green chemistry is agnostic of the use and just says, are the building blocks fundamentally non-toxic and sustainable? If a solar panel is in play, that's great, it's sustainable. But if you're using toxic reagents and a lot of energy in making the solar panel, it's not green. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, it just means we have more work to do. If you've got a water filtration device and you're using toxic materials to synthesize the membranes, we need the purified water, but we still got more work to do. So green chemistry is about the building blocks. And so I see the world in two different ways. There are people who design products, and a designer of a product must use materials that are available to them. If those materials that are available to them are fundamentally unsustainable, there is no way you can bolt, glue, staple, or amend something to make it sustainable. And the missing gap here is that the materials that are fundamental building blocks are not sustainable. Right. So until we start working at that level, but that is the domain not of the designers, not of the people working at companies building products. It's the chemistry, and that's where we need to focus our energy. And so and so we got to go hand in hand. We need to design, but the materials are not designed; they are made in chemistry.
That's just an amazing argument. And so then I remember hearing in one of your talks, you spoke about it's much harder to get things off the market. Once they're on, we all know this, right? Legally, they'll go through years of battles, right, to get something toxic off the market, and then of course, by the time you've done that, there's something else that's toxic to replace it. So,
well, see, that's where we are. I feel very strongly that we need to change the way we handle materials in commerce. Now, to begin with, if there are estimates of 80 to 100,000 molecules in commerce, I suspect, all right, that the vast majority of those are safe. We don't have 100,000 toxic materials out there. We have a very small number that are actually bad. But who knows which ones those are? We don't know what ones they are. But the number is probably not as huge as and the problem is we keep going at it the wrong way, in my opinion. We keep making lists of bad molecules. And the problem is that while I can understand for a consumer that's good, avoid this molecule, as an inventor, what does that mean? If you tell me not to use molecule X, okay, well, there are 100,000 minus X molecules, that is not X. So you're telling me just by replacing it, so okay, I could use strychnine, that's not X. Okay, I can use, arsenic, that's not X. So this model of telling people what molecules not to use leads to all these unfortunate substitutions. What we really should be focusing on are what are the tests? Why do you not want me to use X? Well, because in this assay, this is a result. So what you should be telling me is, here is an assay that I want to make sure you perform well on. Not don't use molecule X, because that's not really telling me how to invent a new product. But what we keep doing is making these nasty lists to avoid, and that doesn't help invent. And history is filled with the replacing technology being just as bad or worse. So I really feel there are three approaches, three elements of safer chemicals policy. The first one is to stop making lists of bad molecules and stop making lists of good assays. Tell me what assays and tests to use, and when I invent something, I'll use it. Think of it from a company perspective. If you're a company and it costs millions of dollars to invent a replacement technology, but no one's telling you what test is going to say if it's good or bad, who in their right mind will invest in that black box of not knowing? So it's actually cheaper and more cost-effective to pay lawyers to fight the regulation than to invent an alternative, because there's no rules to the game. If you were to tell industry, here is the test you must pass, they would in a heartbeat say, sure, okay, we'll do it. We don't do that. And so that's problem number one. Problem number two is we focus on ingredients instead of finished products. And I think that gets us in big trouble, because ingredients go away in manufacturing and new materials appear. So when you look at a list, we just heard of a very, very well-known safe cosmetics line that, oh my God, a molecule is in it and it's not listed in the ingredients. If we just say, I want to know what's in your ingredients, well, gee whiz, something got in there that wasn't intended. So we should be really testing the final product, and it's a lot cheaper, right? If I have a toothpaste and it has 27 ingredients, what am I supposed to do, 27 different tests? Who's going to pay for all that? That's ridiculous. But if I do one test and show that the product is safe, I'm done. If the product isn't safe, then I can pay the money to figure out what ingredient isn't. And the cool thing is there's no trade secrets. Right? Because where the chemical industry pushes back is they don't want to say what their magic ingredient is. That's a trade secret. But now you don't have to. Tell how the product behaves. So we have a cancer test. We have a endocrine disruption test. We have a neurotoxicity test. We have these tests, and we just report to society how products respond to those. So the second element is to look at the products, not the ingredients. And then the last one is the most controversial. No one should play God and say what is good and bad. Just provide the number. I can go on my cell phone and I can say, okay, this product got a 7.2 on the cancer test. It got a 5.3 on the endocrine test. It got a 4.2 on the neurotoxin test. Looking at that data, I can make a decision. Do I want to buy that product or not? Two important things happen. First, society realizes nothing gets a zero. And that's something people really got to wrap themselves around, this belief that there's an absence of risk. Every product will show a non-zero number on these assays. That's the way science works. Zero is an unattainable thing, and most things will have non-zero. And so that's really important. But the second thing is, right now someone will have a website that says don't buy a product with parabens or don't buy a product with phthalates. I could just be told, don't buy a product that gets a 7.2 or greater on this or a 4.3. We can still inform the consumer, but do it in such a way that the inventors now know the targets. Okay, everyone doesn't like 7.3, so I can go in the lab, I can make something, I can test it, I've got a 7.5. Go back, do it again, got a 7.4. Go back, I got under 7.2. Yay, now I have something to invent against. What do I invent against if I'm told make it safe?
Right.
What does that even mean to a scientist? So until we translate this into something that is actionable and inventable, and so that's where green chemistry comes in, is trying to find a way. And so these three elements of safer chemicals policy is my bizarre and unique way of looking at what I feel we should be doing.
And do you think this is possible? It's a great idea. Do you think it's possible to get this numbering system in place?
I would say it is no more difficult than what we're trying to do now. I have been on committees where people will spend years saying we should put this molecule on the list, and other people saying we should take this molecule off the list. And so we spend years debating a subset of 10 or 12 lists. And like you said, there's 100,000 molecules. We're going to have a long time going through 100,000 molecules.
Right.
the number of assays out there is a heck of a lot smaller than the number of molecules. So you can debate, this is my preferred cancer test. I can debate this preferred. But once we settle that debate, we got all the molecules. And we can regularly revisit those tests, but it just seems a more faster track to getting to something. Yes, there are a million reasons why this is hard. There's a million reasons politically and just from inertia that this is difficult. But what I find is when I say, okay, can you suppress your disbelief that it's attainable? If it were attainable, is it good? Most people say, yeah, but I don't believe it's attainable. I'm like, well, okay, wait a minute. Let's first agree we should do it, and then get rid of those barriers to attain it. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the EWG, Environmental Working Group.
Yeah.
So EWG, which has a website that I love, it's Environmental Working Group, the cosmetics database.
Yep.
I send many of my students there because I want them to know what they're using on their bodies, and at least they have a choice then.
Yep.
I want to use that thing that smells so great, but you should know that that's a carcinogen, right?
Right.
But they have a numbering system like you're describing.
Yep.
I mean, that works for me. It's much clearer than knowing what each chemical means.
Right. The problem with something like that, and I agree, it's a great system, but it's only reporting the numbers that they know.
Oh.
And so when you look at a list of things, because no one is systematically testing, it's just what they can find in the literature. And so there's gaps, and what do you do with those gaps? So I wish we could set up a criteria and say to companies, here are 8, here are 9 tests that you should do for everyone. And so if you think about it, it's not unlike how we handle going to a grocery store. Right? If you pick up a product in a grocery store, it has a list of ingredients. It says how many calories, how much protein, how much fat, how much carbohydrates. There's all these different diets. One person may want to do, all protein diet. Someone may want to do all carbohydrates. One may want to do a equal mix of different. We don't say good, bad in the grocery store. We just give the information for someone to do what they want to do. And I think we need to do that with toxicity. If I lost a loved one to cancer, and I say, I'm not going to buy a product with a carcinogen in it, and I have 3 products, and they all have problems. One has a potential for this, one has and I choose that I'm not going to get the carcinogen. I'm sending a message to the market that, hey, the sales are going down here, and inventors are going to invent better materials for the right reason.
So I want to ask you a very simple question.
Yeah.
So I'm a woman, which I am, and I want to buy lipstick, for instance. I go in the store, I pick up some famous brand, which I won't name, but I pick up that brand and it's red whatever, and how is that product tested? How do I know that is that's safe, or, I mean, who decided that it was okay to stick that on the shelf and put on my lips and then it ends up in my body? How is that decision made?
In my opinion, in the current system, you got to hope. Because what's happened is a group of people have decided that some subset of ingredients should be tested. No one's testing the product. They're testing a subset of ingredients. So you better hope someone picked the right ingredients to be testing, because we don't have a system.
You mean they're not all tested? There could be things in that lipstick that were never tested?
The way that we go about the ingredient lists, someone has decided, and there's a logic to it. There's so many molecules, we can't test every molecule, so here are bad ones. And as long as that doesn't have one of these bad ones,
it's fine.
And obviously
according
that's not true.
To the industry,
exactly. Right. And so, like I said, there's what's been put in the product or what gets transformed during the manufacturing process, right? Chemistry happens as a product is manufactured. Ingredients vanish and new molecules appear. And so just looking at an ingredient list and having some list of 12 molecules and saying, okay, these 12 molecules are not in the product, good. It's better than nothing, but we've got a long way to go.
How is this even possible? I mean, one of the things that bothers me, and I have my personal pet peeve is this, the breast cancer, the pink.
Yep.
Because the pink is embraced by the very industries that are producing these products that are carcinogenic. We know this, right? So we were talking about this earlier. You can't think that they're all just these evil people creating lipstick to make everybody sick, or perfume that's making everybody sick, or shampoo, or whatever it is. Or even think about, this hair straightening, which is so popular now, and it's formaldehyde, which is then fumes. So they're not sitting in their lab saying, I want to invent things that's just going to kill women and kill men, right? So How is this happening? I mean, what's your explanation for this? So we do have all these products that are so dangerous.
Well, I've been at this for over 30 years, okay? I do not see the epic battle of good and evil.
You don't?
I have not encountered, I have encountered ignorance, I have encountered stupidity, but not outright evil. I have never met somebody or even believed that I met somebody who was saying, wow, I know this is toxic, but look at my bank account. Now, either deep and sincerely or through some psychological gamesmanship that they do, they sincerely believe that their products are safe. And I really do believe when they look you in the eye and say, of course this product is fine, they're not lying. They really do believe it because, again, we don't know what the word safe means, all right? And so think about it in a different way. If chemists, who are the only people on the planet who understand molecular structure, who understand the interplay between molecules and life systems, are not being trained in toxicology, who is? So there is a big knowledge gap here. And some people are cynical, saying, well, wait a minute, if I didn't learn this when I was in college, how important can this be? Right. And so it's all about education. At the end of the day, it's all about, because the way someone is trained at the university sets their worldview, and when they work in companies for the rest of the time, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, why should I care about this now? If this was truly important when I was in the university, this would have been talked about. Clearly, it can't be very important if I didn't talk about it in the, and so then when people say there's toxic materials, those people become vice presidents and presidents, and they come and say, what are you talking about? There's no big deal here, and it's just ingrained in the system because of the absence of it when they were in the formative years of becoming a scientist.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I have one last question for you, and then we have to stop. But do you become frustrated, I would imagine, knowing what you know and living in the world we live in today? So you're living with your family. I'm guessing you have a house. Maybe you don't, but let's say you have a house and you have your lawn. I know all around me, I can see what's going on people's lawns, and I just want to tear my hair out because, you know, I know what that product is doing, and I know it causes cancer, and I want to run across the street and say, how can you put that on your lawn? Your dog is going to get sick. Your kid will maybe get cancer 10 years from now. So do you feel that frustration?
So it's an interesting, I think I can answer that. So I was on Tom Ashbrook a few years ago, and I could feel the pain of all the callers coming, is this toxic? Am I hurting my children? Am I hurting? We're inundated with all this stuff. And then the next day you get this guilt, this, oh my God, all this stuff that I'm doing to expose my family, and oh, what a horrible person. And the way I look at it is the following. 99% of our impact on our health and well-being is what we eat. All right? No one is perfect at eating everything that they should eat and not eating the things that they shouldn't. No one is exercising perfectly. And so if the vast majority of our well-being is about that, if we were doing that absolutely perfect and doing everything we could to be perfect eaters and perfect nutrition, perfect exercise, then we should start panicking about the rest of this stuff. But when we realize that we're really doing a lot not appropriately in the rest of it, we've got to put it in context. Yes, in a perfect world, we would remove all this risk, but there are so many things out there that can hurt us. The last thing we want to do is live in a little bubble, terrified that everything we do hurts, because once we believe we can't do anything, that it's too big of a problem, we recede and stop doing anything, and that is the worst of any outcome. So yes, everything we do can be improved, but we will never be in a world of zero risk, okay? Every activity that we do, some analysis, has impact negatively on something else. It's just the way, the fundamental law of thermodynamics. And so we can't believe that there's a zero risk world. And so as long as we, and that's, at the end of the day, you know, a lot of people talk about this and it sounds hokey, but we got to believe in a positive future. Once we lose that, everything else is lost.
I completely agree with that. So just to sum up what you're saying, if it's just to make sure I get it right, it sounds like what you're saying is, you know, we are just do better, work on the education piece so that people are thinking preventatively when they're on the creating end.
Yep.
The creators need to be aware
Yes.
of this, which is what you're doing, and you're spreading
Yeah.
this word far and wide. And we're seeing sustainability education everywhere. These programs are popping up all over
Yep.
the country. They didn't exist 10 years ago. So many of them are, or
Yep.
most of them didn't. They're
Yep.
really very new.
Yep.
Environmental studies was around, but
Yep.
still this is very new. And the fact that it is so popular and that these programs are really a positive sign. And if we eat well and take care of ourselves, much of these issues can be taken care of.
Yeah, and unless, and that is just the absence of the panic, because we have,
Right.
our neighbors that have the skull and crossbones, they're doing something on their
Right.
lawn. And here we are doing everything we can. And obviously I've got a 3-year-old daughter that's, oh my God, and you can just completely become paralyzed by this information. And it is scary information.
Right.
And the last thing we can afford is becoming paralyzed.
Completely agree with that.
Yeah.
So thank you for talking to me today. It's
Yeah,
just
my
enlightening,
pleasure.
and I
Yeah.
love what you're doing. And
Thank you.
Obviously I embrace it as a
Yeah.
fellow educator.
Yeah, thank
and your story is so powerful.
Thank you.
And we're just really so glad to have Jon Bowermaster on. His book will be coming out soon. What's the title of it again?
Called The Missing Element.
The Missing Elements. I can't show it to our
Yeah.
audience because it's not out yet. I
Yeah.
don't think there's a cover
I actually
yet.
have 3 covers on my cell phone
you
the
do?
other day. I'm picking between them. Yeah.
Well, maybe if
Yeah,
you send it to
yeah,
us, we'll be
yeah,
able to post
yeah.
it later on my website.
Yeah.
You'll be able to watch this talk and all of my other talks on Coffee with H2 on my website, HeidiHutner.com. And we thank Jon so much for being on
you.
the show today.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.